Hey, all. Thanks for listening to Now We're Talking with Doug Padgett. On the podcast today, it's one of the sermons from Solomon's Porch. On June 10th, we had this gathering, and normally I just include the sermon portion for this podcast, but this time I included a whole number of other elements from the gathering, including some music, prayer time. It was led by Shelley. Tessa did this great bit in our training for becoming an anti-racist community. And then there were two soapbox sermons. Victoria and Anna each did one. And their soapbox sermons are centering around the Beatitudes. That's what we're going to be doing all summer, which is that beginning of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "Blessed are those who." So we've invited people in our community, 2 people a week, to give reflections on how they understand that, how they think that compels us to a life of goodness in the world, and so on. So really great pieces. But then there was some music that was really wonderful and some comments before it. So I decided to include a whole number of elements here in the podcast. So you get a little bit more flavor of what we do at Solomon's Porch, how it happens, and where these sermons come from and why they settle in the way that they do. You might know that our room, we meet in the round, and it's in this big room, and there's kids moving around, and we use microphones interspersed with some of the things we do and not with all of them. So recording the room is a difficult thing. So you're going to hear lots of movement, a lot of ambience, a lot of bounce of sound in the room, and lots of different voices. And we think that all goes together to shape what we do and how we do our gatherings as a community, and also I think how you can listen to these. So you're going to notice just some different levels of audio as we go through the hour together here. So I hope that you enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed this gathering. I thought it was just a really great one, and so much goodness came out of it. And you'll hear little introductions of why we're doing it the way we are from the people who are making their presentations. So here it is, our June 10th, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Gathering and podcast. Enjoy. I'll add my welcome, hopefully the welcome you've gotten from other people. Nice to see you today. Congratulations on getting here with 94 closed, 35 closed, Lindale closed. Maybe you came by bike. And that was a smart move, if there's any other way to get in. Our community meets here on these Sunday mornings. This week we start our soapbox sermons, where we are going to be delving as a community into the teachings of Jesus around what are often called the Beatitudes. And that will be 2 sermons each week from 2 different people. Today it's Victoria and Anna. They'll each do 10-minute soapbox sermons. If you'd like to do one of those, you're more than welcome to. Tessa has a bit of training for us on anti-racism practices for us as a community. Shelley's going to lead us in a time of prayer. We're all going to collaborate together in greeting one another, encouraging one another, communion together, all the rest of those things. We'll sing and tell stories, and be reminded that, as that song was alluding to, some places there's waters that rise and floods and make the land inhospitable. And some places fire and lava comes rolling down hills. And some places the winds blow really strong. Some places the earth shakes. Some places it collapses and falls in. It's enough to make someone think that the planet's not all that hospitable sometimes for human life. It can be a struggle. And some of us feel all of that not only in the earth around us, but in our own selves. We feel it in our bodies. We'll feel it in our spirit. Sometimes we feel it in our society. It feels like things are blowing up or blowing down or collapsing in or opening up. Just a lot that goes on in people's lives, in our relationships, in our friendships, in our spirituality. And all of that is part of the story that we live as human beings and the human thriving that God calls us to in the way of Jesus. So we're glad you're here to do this as a community. Our little ones around us cheer us on in some ways and lead us in others, and are following all of us as well. So really nice to have you here today, and we'll join our lives together in all the goodness that comes in a world full of beauty, pain, heartache, and complexity. So happy Sunday, everyone.
So I know I've played this tune like 4 weeks in a row because it's newest to me. And so this weekend, our son Josiah graduated high school. Yeah, I know. And I'm still recovering, or not recovering. This song has meant a lot, actually, in the last week or so of of this kind of transition in life, realizing that when I graduated high school, my parents were in the heat of a divorce, and so I found myself a little numb this week, and I didn't know why until I recognized that. I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to be that numb guy without knowing it, or why, or anything to my son as he's struggling. So yeah, I had a little realization, had some good conversations, and
I used to have my ear pierced, and I
this song has a lot to do with that. We pack away trauma, we do all that kind of stuff without even recognizing it, and I listened to it this week.
It's really lovely too.
In the back room, I put them there, I packed them there, I left them there and set them there out of view. I filled each one with stuff undone and scattered in a bunch I should have done. I had the time to go and make myself do from a certain point of view.
talked, I'm Shelley. Doug talked about how what's happening in the world, it's also happening inside of us. Sometimes this peace and calm of a quiet river, flowing stream, a steady ocean. And sometimes it feels like there's waves and ripples and huge storms around us and within us. And I'm reminded of the volcano that erupted this week in Guatemala, and that we have friends in Guatemala. I always get a little emotional, but we have dear friends in Guatemala, and they're affected by this volcanic eruption. And I also have dear friends in this room whom I know life isn't easy at the moment. So I'm also reminded that we are never alone. And when I was younger and heard stories about God's breath or God always being with us, it felt a little bit elusive, something that I couldn't quite connect to. And now I really recognize God's ever-presence in me as the Holy Spirit and my breath. And the breath is so powerful, and I think when I think about the song that Ben just sang, or our situations in our lives, that when things get stressful, we hold our breath in. Our breath is really shallow, and oftentimes there's like even a gasp. If you were to gasp right now, the gasp tells us like, I'm frightened or I'm holding something in. We hold that typically in our chest. And when we begin to move toward processing what's happening in our lives, we can utilize our breath not only as a physical expanding and contracting, but also an expanding of breathing in and a contracting of releasing. And it's a very powerful practice. Some of you guys are in breath practices already. If not, it's a powerful thing. And so I wanted to bring out for all of us the beautiful, if I can get it out, Hoberman sphere. Thank you. So the Hoberman sphere we use in classes with kids, but also adults. So oftentimes we'll say, pick a point on the Hoberman sphere, and as we breathe in, put your hands on your belly. So breathe in, let your belly get really big like the sphere. And when you breathe out, the ball comes in. Let's do that 3 more times together. Put your hands on your belly. When you breathe in, feel your breath, open your body up. When you breathe out, let it go. 2 more times, feel God's Spirit in you. Moving, letting things get unstuck. 1 more, big one. And then close your eyes for just a moment. Keep your hands on your belly. And take just a moment to sit up tall and ponder, think about in your life something that is feeling stuck or something that you've packed away. Maybe some movement that needs to happen. And on your own, with your eyes closed, take a deep breath in. Feel your belly open in toward your hands. And as you breathe out, feel your belly soften. The eyes are soft. Do that 2 more times. Breathing in love, and breathing out peace, and breathing in hope, and breathing out life. Amen.
Lots of famous things Jesus is quoted as saying, and one of those is, your prayer to God, your kingdom come and will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That little refrain there at the end feels a lot like that, doesn't it? Like that desire that things would be made right for all of us. We do communion here as a big collective. Our little ones go out. Mason, by the way, gets here early and sets all that up for the little ones. So thanks for that, Mason. And if you're sitting around at the end of the gathering in any of the plates or cups or bread or containers with the drinks in them are left, feel free to bring those back into the kitchen. You can participate in that way. You can also participate. The little ones go out and grab all the items. They bring them back in. They set them around. We gather around to where they bring them, and then we tell this big story together. So we'll stand up, and anyone who wants to be a reader can join all of our voices together. This is a little thing that we read at the beginning of this. We've been reading this for a lot of years in this community, and it takes on different meanings at different times as you read it. So feel free to add your voice with the rest of us as we read it out loud, or maybe just take a chance to listen to the others as we say it. So here we go. We take communion
By serving and eating bread and wine together in community with followers of Jesus around the world and throughout all ages. We enter this mystery, proclaiming and hiding the faith of Jesus as the Messiah, whose life, death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and sending show the love of God for the world, free us from sin, and initiate the kingdom of God in our world in new ways, for the benefit and blessing of all the world.
All right. Hi. So I'm Tessa Weedren. That's my husband because I talk about him a lot. I'm going to talk about anti-racism stuff, and I picked the category of personal, which I kind of find a little bit tricky because it always also has to do with structure and institutions. So I'm going to kind of talk about all of that. So what we're doing, just to update everybody, we're doing a series on anti-racism, and we're talking about the realms of racism, of personal, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural. And we're really trying to hold to what we call the 4 agreements, which comes out of the Courageous Conversations work, which is to stay engaged, to experience discomfort, speak your truth, and expect non-closure, which is a huge, hard thing. But that's kind of that. Those are some principles of how we're doing this conversation. There they are again. So the Courageous Conversations, trying to sort of divide the work into thinking, acting, feeling, and believing, knowing that lives don't really divide, but that's how that works. These are not my slides. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, sorry, I didn't know those. This is my personal journey to becoming what I hope is an anti-racist person. I thought I would put, this is a slide of our family dressing as ABBA for Halloween, taking pictures in Ingebrigtsens, because that's where you do it. I really like my daughter who's playing the piano at the bottom. So I think I liked this, and I wanted to start here because becoming an anti-racist person also connects with understanding what it is to be a super white lady living in South Minneapolis, which is what I am. So I think a lot of it starts with my mom. This is my mom, who's in this picture is doing a reenactment of Gracia Countryman, the founder of the Hennepin County Library System, in Sumner Library in North Minneapolis for a Juneteenth celebration piece. So my whole life, my mom has guided our family in constant interaction with people of different races. And it has been since birth, and it's been a piece of our life, and I think it absolutely made me who I am. Another piece she did, which I'm not going to show it all because it's too long, since birth we participated in a lot of Cold War activism. So we were always in walks and marches, we were in plays about the Cold War. I feel like I knew a lot more about the Cold War as a 5-year-old than maybe other people did. But, it became like, and I think one thing that was a constant part of me was even though this is so big, I have a role in this. Because I was a 5-year-old in South Minneapolis, what am I supposed to do about the Cold War? Well, something. not nothing. So that was kind of a huge piece that she has brought into my life. And then I grew up at Park Avenue Church. So Park Avenue Church is 34th and Park and a super multiracial community. And I grew up there. And I assumed that if you loved Jesus, you were a part of a multicultural world and you talked about justice all the time. So not everybody had that experience growing up in church. But that's what I thought church was, is talking about justice and righteousness and the love of God for all people. So another thing that was a huge part of our church was a connection with African American families in Minneapolis who often come to Minneapolis from Chicago because Chicago is hard. And so something I remember deeply hitting me in middle school and high school was that some of my friends and some of the leaders in our group came out of places like Cabrini Green. And if you haven't heard of Cabrini Green, it's a large public housing in Chicago, and people would talk about what life was like there, and I understood at 12 that that was a different deal and that it had nothing to do with their value as a person, right? It was where they were born. And so I had a stark realization through this Cold War conversation and through this Cabrini Green stories of life is different and it has to do with things beyond who the person is. And then I went to Bethel for seminary. I went to a lot of places for college. I went to New Mexico State for college, and then I thought I was going to be a missionary, and I went to Bethel. And we had these really weird race relations things happening, and the students felt threatened, so the staff told the students of color to stay home for a couple of days. And I was like, what? So I did a protest and a sit-in and stuff, which was not real common at the seminary, and recognized that I wasn't well-suited to be a Baptist or a Southern Baptist missionary, which was what I was on the track to be. So I went back to Park Avenue, and I joined the staff there for a while. And this was part of my staff, and it was so beautiful. And it's hard to understand if you don't really love youth ministry why this is beautiful. But this is 6 a.m., and these kids are sitting in a circle with me, and they were all going back and every day loving the kids that they were working with. And it was just this amazing experience. And I also started to recognize more what systemic stuff is. So I had some of these kids who gave me social security numbers that weren't socials, and they didn't know it. They didn't know they weren't documented. I had kids that came in and then went to jail that summer. I had 2 kids who one of them got the other one pregnant. A lot of stuff, and I was I am not. So this is where, look, that's me, and it was 50 pounds lighter, so it's hard to tell. It's in the bottom right. But it's fine, it's 2 children. But it was a good realization of no matter how much I think this is important, I don't have the skills, and I'm really doing a bad job. And I loved completely, but I also didn't have skills, and I didn't have a lot of self-awareness, and that made things really hard, much harder than I would have guessed. And then I went to Humphrey. I went to the University of Minnesota, and I read a lot of stuff, but one of the books that really stuck with me was this book called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel, I can't remember her last name, Wilkerson? Yeah, so I would recommend this. And I think what she does and what was nice about some of the stuff I read at Bethel or at Humphrey was this concept of story within the system. So she follows the lives of African Americans who were with what we call the Great Migration, which is when people moved up from the South into the industrial North and what that meant. And it really connected back to Chicago for me and to the Cabrini Green story, because families who were full families in the South moved to Chicago, and in order to work, to live, because people charged them higher rents because they were black, they had to live in certain neighborhoods, and the parents had to work 3 jobs, and they weren't at home. And they couldn't be with their family and their children, and some of their children, when unattended, as my children do, made choices that ruined their lives. And there's it's an interesting piece to go from the history of structure to what we want to think is just personal choices and understand how those roll together. So it was a huge place for me where I was oh, this is how these systems make personal lives awful. And then I also had a lot of conversations about the difference between impact and intent. And it really connected back to me to Park Avenue of it didn't matter what my intent was, it matters what my impact is. And I think if you think about church missions or charitable experiences, and I would sit there in class with other adults in Humphrey who would say, but people have good intention and that's what matters. And no, it doesn't. If you go into a place and say you think I have good intention, I want everyone to see, and I'm going to give them all glasses, and then they're all going to have to go and pay a glasses fee every week, and only people who have good glasses are going to get the better jobs. That's a bad analogy. Intent doesn't matter. Impact matters. And you can have all the good ideas you want, and if you're not watching about what the impact is, you are not doing a good thing. And it's not what we want. We want to think all that matters is that you have a good heart, but impact is more important than intent, unfortunately. So one of the things that's become really meaningful for me lately that I've been trying to understand more of is this concept of bystander intervention. That's kind of the fancy word for it. It came out of a lot of domestic and interpersonal violence work, but the basic idea of being, if you are standing there and you see something, what do you do? Because the not doing anything but like feeling good about it or bad about it doesn't mean anything. That's not impact. So this is kind of just a really brief slide on you could intervene directly, you could distract, you could delegate, you could get the situation, or you could delay. You can somehow make the situation worse. There was a great story on Facebook that some of you probably saw today or a couple days ago, a Greyhound bus was stopped in like northern Texas, and the cops got on and said, we need everybody's papers. And that's illegal. They can't do that. You can do that within 100 miles of the border. You can ask anyone for their papers at any time. You can't do that further up. That's how our law is right now. So this woman stood up on the bus and yelled, I'm not giving you the papers, and no one else is either. No one has to do that. And the cops were there, and she kept yelling, and the cops got off the bus and left. And in a place where deportations and detentions are happening like crazy right now to a lot of people, that is distracting. It's delaying. It's getting in there. And it's super difficult. And there are trainings and things you can do to practice how to do it so that when we're sitting there and something happens, and it usually isn't something that obvious, right? And it's not usually something like you're sitting there and someone calls someone a dirty name. It's not usually that. But the skills of this can help you figure out what to do in any type of situation like that. There's another phrase that I wrote down that I forgot to put in my PowerPoint that I think is great called get your uncle. And not everybody may have heard of this. But the concept being that if you're in a place and someone's not being kind and you're the closest one to that person, in some cases that might mean you're the only white person and they're the white person, or you're sitting by them, then in the same way that if you were at something and your uncle was drunk and being crazy at a restaurant and it would be your job to go get them, your job as a white person, as a person of a different race with other people, is to go get your uncle and go get your aunt. So this is a new idea for me, and I was talking to some people and they'd been to a training and they said, in the training, this white lady got up and went on and really focused herself in this conversation that wasn't about herself, and focused her own race and focused her own needs. And someone said, somebody better go get your aunt. And a couple of white people got up and walked over to her and said, hey, can we talk to you about this in the hall instead? And removed her from the situation. And it's like bystander intervention, right? They're distracting. They're not shutting it all down and making it everyone's problem. But you yourself are saying, okay, and it's awkward because it's not my fault that person's doing that, but maybe I'm the right person to intervene. And that's kind of the concept behind Go Get Your Uncle. You can read online about it and Google it, and it'd be much more clear than what I'm saying. So then I started to think about how do I do this idea within my work, and I ended up working at the Department of Health and some other places, and I got to be a part of a lot of great trainings, and I think as much as I keep thinking, oh my gosh, I'm done with these trainings, I've done enough, the more and more trainings I get, the more skills I get, and that is important. And one of the things that was really highlighted there for me is the concept of leading with race, because we want to talk about social inequities as if it's everything. And I go to things right now where I meet with people and I'm like, tell me about the diversity here. And they're like, well, they're all white, but we have old people and young people, and we have people who work and people who don't. Yeah, you can talk about diversity that way, but race is a big deal. And you can't use talking about other types of diversity or other types of inequity as an excuse to not talk about race, which is what often happens. And when we look at disparities in Minnesota and in our country, and this would not be the case if you were in a different country. Most likely. There are other countries where you could have something else you have to lead with. But in the United States, with the current disparities that we have, race is the number one indicator. And you can take out economic, you can take out college degrees, and race is still there. And so that's the reason why when thinking about justice lenses, when thinking about social policy and changes, you have to have a race lens also. And you can have other lenses that make sense. But if you're ignoring it, that's an issue. So this is kind of this intercultural development circle. And this says, like, what does it mean to be a person who is anti-racist, a person who understands intercultural stuff and who can deal with it. I have found this really helpful, and I would say I didn't really come across this until a couple of years ago, but I could see how pieces of my life delved into it. So knowledge, skills, and attitude. So knowledge might be some stuff about, oh, they like to have tea before meals. You know, it's kind of stuff, it can be that kind of stuff, but it also can be some deeper things about how systems work, how policies have impacted. Attitudes is kind of, it has to do with like your respect and openness and your empathy and ability to kind of to want to be a part of that conversation and to hear people. And then I think the piece that I forget about being so important is skills. And you actually build your skills. We don't come into the world understanding how to deal with difficult situations and understanding our own privilege. You have to build those skills. And I think that's a helpful piece of it isn't my fault, or it is my, like, I've done stuff and I've been awkward and rude and I've been disrespectful and used my privilege, and I will use building skills and attitude and culture to get better. And it doesn't really have to do with worrying about what I did last year. It has to do with how can I move forward in this. And so for me, what that has meant, that kind of moved a little, but for me, the knowledge piece is really how can I listen to voices. And so sometimes that's training pieces, but a lot of it is like, what news do I listen to? What people do I listen to? Who do I put myself in front of? I just met this guy this week at a training who said he has chosen that no more than 50% of his media will come from white men. So that means like he had to change his podcast list and some of his TV shows and some of his radio. You know, like who do you listen to matters. The building skills through action is finding real action steps. And yeah, like I've been in a job with a lot of obvious action steps because I've been in some policy places and some grant-making places. But every place has real action steps, right? Like my kid's school has real action steps. Your neighborhood next door has a million real action steps. Like places have real action steps. So finding those and then figuring out what are the skills, what are the pieces I need to be able to address this. And then the thing that is hardest for me that I think I'm learning more of is self-awareness. And I went to this really great training. I think some of you remember Dee McIntosh, who came here, I think you guys had it a year ago. I went to a training that she did a meditation piece, and instead of doing self-care, she did self-compassion, which I thought was like mind-blowing. And I couldn't go back, so I cried the whole time. And I was like, take a year before I talk to her. It was like this concept of like, I will be compassionate about where I am. I will see where I am, and I'll be honest with myself about where I am, and then I will have compassion on it, which is a new thing that I'm trying. But I think we'll get the self-awareness piece, will continue to help me work on that self-awareness piece. And then maybe I can be a friend, an ally, an activist. These words are so hard, and there's all this like conversation around what the word, I just saw recently, don't try to be an activist, try to be an ally. Don't be an ally, be a partner. Don't be a partner, be someone in solidarity with other people. I like that phrase the best, but I couldn't figure out how to put it succinctly, like a solidarityist. And I think these words are important because it has to do with where you are in the power relationship to the work and to other people. So I just like, this is another piece I just wanted to add in about how much language matters and how much learning about these different words and different ideas and different structures has helped me understand, going back to that piece, understand the voices, the awareness, and what the skills are. So other resources, just I wanted to mention some of the things I mentioned. The Warmth of Other Suns. Fake Equity is a great website that talks about like what's real equity and what's fake equity. There's equity is a trendy term. I follow on Facebook Nakima, Ashley, and Navigate Minnesota, because those are voices I would not hear if I'm not watching them somewhere. And those people all are grateful for anyone to follow them. And just, so certain I was trying to think about what vocabulary is so important. So what vocabulary has helped me learn something recently. So vocabulary, microaggressions, colorism, and reparations. I've learned a lot from conversations around those three words. So.
You might wonder, wow, Tessa got
do this fabulous thing. We are taking 4 different components of anti-racism training as a community: personal, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic. So last week, Michelle Steffen did systemic. Today, thank you, Tessa, for the personal. Next week, interpersonal. If you'd like to be part of any of these trainings, we'd love for you to do it. You can bring your own training to it if you're looking for some resources. We're going to shift into soapbox sermons here in a minute, but between this one and the soapbox sermons, and between soapbox sermons, you're going to have 2 minutes to process by yourself, with yourself, on your phone, or in conversation with someone around you. So I will set a timer, so it'll only be 2 minutes. So take 2 minutes and reflect on what you heard from Tessa. If I'm in a group, I will reflect on that great phrase, what do you do when there's big issues? Well, do something, not nothing. That is a great line. So take 2 minutes if you would, interact with each other, with those around you, and I'll call you back when the mostly it's to shift the energy and to sort of recalibrate yourself. And we're going to read together the phrases that we're going to be centering the soapbox sermons around. They are the Beatitudes out of the Sermon on the Mount, beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Up on the screen, you'll see 2 of them on each slide. You can be a reader of a whole slide or just a reader of one of those, and we'll give multiple voices to these. And then know that over the course of the summer, different people will add 10 minutes worth of conversation about those things. So, Tommy, you ready? Anybody can be a reader of the whole thing or just one of the lines, if you will.
Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying,
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
So there it is. We will then have thoughts on this from each of our soapbox sermons. Victoria's going to use poetry, but no matter what someone's using, we like to give people a little snap around here to encourage them that we want to hear from them. And thank you, Victoria.
So as I contemplated this phrase, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs are the kingdom of heaven, the more I thought about it, the less I felt convinced of what it might mean. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? What does it mean to be blessed by that? What does it mean to inherit the kingdom of heaven? And I can only tell you what I'm thinking about it right this moment, which is that perhaps being poor in spirit are those moments when we feel really raw, vulnerable, completely humbled, and that any good that comes out of those moments can be a blessing, and that this is a part of our shared humanity, and that when we can tap into that, we perhaps can take part in the common good together, and I think of that as something kingdom-oriented. And I think a lot of poetry is exploring the alchemy of those things. These happen to be 3 of my newer poems. It's possible that when I looked at the Beatitudes, I thought, which one do I think would go with these most recent ones? But I'm not agreeing to. And my son did approve that I could share this next poem with you. I haven't really done it many places, so. When my 15-year-old son asked me what sweatshirt he should wear, I tried to play it cool and not show my pleasure that he wanted my opinion, that he spoke to me in a full sentence, not a guttural, monosyllabic utterance he usually flung my way like a empty, crumpled gum wrapper. As he invited me into his room, I held my breath a little, as though I were entering an old, ornate church. His purple and blue sweatshirts laid out particularly like communion elements. I gently lifted the sleeve of each sweatshirt with the same tenderness I once used to bathe him as a baby. "Which sweatshirt do you think looks best with these?" he asked, gesturing to his jeans. I tried not to think about how when he was 3, he believed he wanted to live with me forever. And he used to kiss me on the cheek over and over again with a loud smack. "Awa, awa, awa." I wish I had known the last time he kissed me like that was the last time. I always knew love like this pops and fades like wildflowers. I was lucky to ever have it at all. It was mine once. That is enough. With all the love I could fit in a small moment and a smile, I said, "I think the blue one looks best." And as I left his room, he said, "Thanks, Mom. Shut the door behind you." A few months ago, some of us discovered that a dear friend of this community living in Thailand named Rachel nearly died from AVM. She survived, and she's been in a long process of recovery these past few months. She's pregnant, and she has a small toddler. She's far away, and it was one of those mornings for so many of us where we felt completely stripped of everything we assumed about life. And I wrote this poem for her in my efforts to try to cope with it, and I think it perhaps is a bit of a tribute to moments that all of us have. We never want to have these moments, but we all have them, and they're hard to navigate. Today, on the morning I learned you are in the hospital, for Rachel. Nothing about today feels like today. We expected a different day, one where you aren't hooked up to a ventilator in a coma. I take a shower, change my sweatshirt, fry bacon. Well, the usual things feel unusual. The drip of my wet hair on my neck, the chill of lotion evaporating on my hands. How can we be so fragile? How are we supposed to live when nothing is for certain? I make tea because it's something one can do while weeping. I wonder, Rachel, where does your spirit go while your body is recovering? Does it hover about you or go off to visit family and friends? I would make your spirit tea if it visited me. Please, come visit me. Imagine the cells in your brain creatively bustling, looking at it like a piece of vintage fabric that you would use to make a new dress full of possibility. What shape will your life take if you return to us? I wonder what you would do now if you were me. Perhaps take a walk, feel the warm sun on your face. Consider the way this sun and this face have never been together this way before today. This is called Secret. I remember what you told me. Fragile and bare, like a small bird just born. We held it in our hands together, wondering what color it really was under all that afterbirth. Not even we could see the wings or the wildness under the wings. Not even we could see the vulnerability, the strength pressed under so much vulnerability. But we knew it was sacred, even in its ugliness, its own particular mystery. Still, the beauty to sit with you holding the past, present, and future with breath and anticipation, damp and unrecognizable, when time unfolded for us to infinity, as if we might live in that moment always, even though now the small bird flies free and new secrets gesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. At the end of each one, Tommy, would you leave that back up there? At the end of each one, we'll say the line together, and then you'll have 2 minutes to talk with someone around you or to reflect to yourself. So here we go.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So take 2 minutes, and then we'll hear from Anna.
All right, this is Anna. Anna and I are going to do hers together. And Anna, would you talk a bit about why that is that it feels good for you to have us do it together?
Sure. I told Doug I went to Mexico for a week, and I told him before I left that I wanted to talk about failure. And then yesterday, I called him and left him an almost weepy message saying, I can't do this, I'm not ready. So I guess part of it is that I didn't feel like I could just stand up here and impart knowledge, like a school lecture. I was a teacher for many years, and it just doesn't seem the kind of thing you can impart knowledge about. So Doug said he'd kind of support me on this.
Yeah, so we said, well, let's see if we can talk about it together. Anna had put together some notes, and so I have those notes and I can help make these transitions between ideas. And is there a particular reason that you wanted to reflect on blessed are the poor in spirit?
So blessed are the poor in spirit, and it just kind of like piggybacks right on what Victoria was saying, is that it just seems like when you're poor in spirit, there's an opportunity, right, to grow and to learn and to reflect. And so when I was thinking about it, it just seemed like it's kind of like a reframing, like you're poor in spirit, but you have the kingdom of heaven. So,
and in your own experience, you have experienced emotional and mental strain and struggle and pain and.
Yes. So I guess I want to. So I've been a part of this community my whole entire adult life. I think the first time I showed up, I might have been a senior in high school or my first year of college. And that's my son's dad calling. And so and I've come and I've gone, right? And different periods of my life I've been here, and then I've left for a while, and then I've come back. So it's kind of interesting that here is kind of where I grew up. And I have talked in front here two other times. Once, I think it was a feeling of I know it, and I'm going to share it with you. And then the next time I talked before my son was baptized, he's 8 now, he was baptized here almost 8 years ago. So where was I going, Doug?
I was saying, what you've had your own emotional and mental health struggles.
So I have 2 master's degrees and a bachelor's. And one of those master's degrees is from Harvard Divinity School. And that was probably around then was when I think I knew it all. And I thought I had suffered, right? I think we all think our trials and tribulations, and they are worthy, right? They're hard for us. But I think I didn't know what I would be facing. So 10 years ago, almost exactly, was when I graduated from Harvard. And at that point, I don't know, I felt like I had the whole world ahead of me, right? And since then, I've struggled mightily. I have to look at my list of things. Just in particular, I've struggled in career. I was a teacher for 5 years and then finally had to admit that wasn't, either I couldn't do it or that wasn't the right path for me. And having student loans in that area is kind of hard to admit that that's not great.
Can I read off your list that you have here? I'll read it off for you. Maybe start. In your list, you have written these bullet points: single mother, mental illness, substance abuse, lost love, bankruptcy, job failure.
Yep.
That's a really vulnerable thing to be willing to say to people. So when you're speaking of poor in spirit,
I'm thinking that it's everything that makes you who you are, right? Your identity, everything was kind of stripped bare, right? Yeah, and the substance abuse was related, I think, partly to mental illness. Everything kind of falls right at about years, right? I'm almost at a year of being sober.
Good for you.
And so that, in itself is its own rebuilding, right?
Yeah. And it can feel, you've said this to me before and you have it in your notes, that it can feel like you had all these advantages. You had all this happening and going for you. And then it felt like it all started to erode away inside of you.
Yeah. Yep. And so I was thinking about doing this, and I was thinking of, in the spirit of the Christian testimony, right? There's this low point, and then there's this coming back up, right? If you go to AA meetings, 12-step meetings, there's people giving their testimonies. This low point, I hit rock bottom, and here I am now, right? And I don't know where I'm at in that, right? I'm not standing up here saying I've come back, right?
Yeah.
So,
can I just inject what I appreciate about you sharing this and this reflection of this work? It doesn't say, blessed are those who used to be poor in spirit and now aren't anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. You have a clip that you want to show. We have 4 minutes left, and
Sure.
there's a 2-minute clip.
It's a 2-minute clip. I just want to preface this. Okay, this is J.K. Rowling talking at a Harvard commencement. Now, what is significant about this Harvard commencement? It was my Harvard commencement. So,
not everybody gets to say that on the other side of things, by the way. The time J.K. Rowling spoke at my Harvard commencement.
At my college commencement. And she talked about failure, which when I was sitting in that chair, I think I was just it's J.K. Rowling. But then a couple months ago, I actually listened to it again, and it really struck me. So I think we're starting at 8 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah.
It's 2 minutes.
So why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena where I believed I truly belonged. I was set free because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. You might never fail on the scale I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Failure gave me an inner security that I had never attained by passing examinations. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned no other way. I discovered that I had a strong will and more discipline than I had suspected. I also found out that I had friends whose value was truly above the price of rubies. The knowledge that you have emerged wiser and stronger from setbacks means that you are, ever after, secure in your ability to survive. You will never truly know yourself or the strength of your relationships until both have been tested by adversity. Such knowledge is a true gift for all that it is painfully won, and it has been worth more than any qualification I ever earned. So given a time turner, I would tell my 21-year-old self that personal happiness lies in knowing...
All right, we have 1 minute left, and you have a slide that you wanted to...
Okay, let's hold that up. Can you back it up 1 second? I'm not quite ready for it.
Oh, yeah. Back up 1 second, Tom.
Okay. So I guess, so I watched this, and it brought me to tears, right? Because she was talking to me, but like me in the future. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I guess the main takeaway I had from that was that that when you have really, truly reached what you consider is the depths of failure, it makes you less scared about the future, right? Like, I've survived this. I've moved forward. And so I sent all this right to my family. My family were very close. I sent this video and kind of wrote a lengthy thing. And then my mom responded with this slide, and it says, amazing article. Thanks for sharing. By the way, I don't think you failed at anything. You persevered. And so I guess that's kind of where I want to leave you. If any of you ever want to talk to me about some of the things more in depth of what I've gone through, I'm happy to share. But I think you just have to reframe it, right? And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. With 1 second to spare, by the way. We'll say this together. You have 2 minutes to interact with each other, a song and some invitations. So, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.